I believe that everybody has a story, and I'm fascinated to hear them. So come with me as we take a walk down Fascination Street. Welcome back, Streetwalkers. This episode is with Paul Hollis. Paul is an American author of fictional terrorism and espionage, specifically the Hollow Man series, which is a 3-book series based on his exploits when he worked for a secret United States government agency back in the 70s. In this episode, we talk about what made him join a secret government agency. We talk about what his role was. And then, of course, we get into his books, the Hollow Man series, of which I am 70% through with the first one, and that's why I reached out and wanted to talk to him because I'm enjoying this book so much. We didn't get to everything, so I'm sure Paul is going to be back. I think I already got him to agree to that, so look forward to that. And if you're into Jason Bourne or Tom Clancy or any of those kinds of books, definitely check out the Hollow Man series. The first book is called The Hollow Man. The second one is called London Bridge is Falling Down. And the third one is called Surviving Prague. That one's not out yet, but it will be soon. So definitely go check those out. They're available on Amazon. And like I said, I'm enjoying the hell out of the first book. This was recorded during all the self-distancing due to the coronavirus outbreak. So if that is over by now, woohoo. If not, damn it. But either way, this is my conversation with American author and former secret guy, Paul Hollis. Yeah, talk to me, yeah. Welcome to Fascination Street Podcast, Paul Hollis. How you doing today, Paul?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me here, Steve.
Absolutely, my pleasure. I was thumbing through my Twitter, and I noticed Paul and we've chatted several times on Twitter, and I was like, how come I haven't interviewed Paul yet? And so I said to Paul, how come I haven't interviewed you yet? And he said, I don't know. So here we are. I'm sure everybody read the episode description, but Paul is an American author of fictional terrorism and espionage, which we're going to touch on way later. But first, where were you born and raised, Paul? Where'd you grow up?
Actually, I was born in Alabama, if you could believe that, east of Birmingham. But at the age of 5 or so, I moved to Chicago, kind of grew up there, but really came of age in California. So that's another story. But had a normal childhood, working class family, and through high school, went to college then in 1967. That in itself is a pretty good story if you'd like to hear that one.
Lay it on me.
I entered university at the end of 1967, which the summer of love had just ended. And I fell into a subculture of people that sort of had a different view on life. And I kind of took it a little bit figuratively and literally changed my world. The 1968 Democratic Convention was in Chicago with all the protests, which kind of led to the Chicago 7 trials, if you all are familiar with that. And I kind of hung with some kind of celebrities for that summer, Grace Slick and Garcia and Santana out in the Haight for a while in San Francisco. But really, the thing that I remember from my college days is Woodstock. There's an old saying, that says, if you remember the 60s, you weren't there because I guess you were drugged up or something. But what I do remember about the 60s was that what 19 was like, 19 years old. And that was the summer I went out to Woodstock. And I remember being hyped on adrenaline and pumped and hungry and dancing to the nonstop music. I remember being hungry and dirty and clean all at the same time and kind of things. And it just kind of all came together, dancing to the music nonstop 3 or 4 days. So really what I don't remember about the 60s is another time like that. So that is probably my childhood that sort of set the path for the rest of my life kind of thing. So that's kind of like how I grew up.
Gotcha. Why did you guys move around so much when you were a kid? What'd your parents do?
My dad worked for the railroad. I mean, they didn't move around. I sort of did. I was never kind of happy at any one place or time, and seemed like, let's go for this greener grass, and the grass got greener, but the life didn't, So, I just kind of melded into this wanting to see the world and understand what it was all about and all that sort of thing. And it just happened that way, that I kind of was able to see the world on somebody else's money, which is really a fantastic kind of a thing. But they didn't move around.
Okay. Well, let's talk about you seeing the world on somebody else's dime. Now, if memory serves correctly, you at one point joined the Peace Corps?
Yes.
Why?
Well, when I was in college, I actually majored in staying out of Vietnam. And so when I graduated from college, I thought, well, rather than kind of holding a gun, because my dad actually wanted me to go to Quantico, to FBI school. And so I thought, well, after whining about Vietnam for 4 years, it'd kind of be like a sacrilege to sort of, okay, now I'm going to carry a gun for the rest of my life. So I joined the Peace Corps instead as my sort of path in life of just doing something different. And they sent me for my training down to this place called Paintsville, Kentucky, somewhere like that, close to the Cumberland Gap, which is about a stone throw from the lost world of West Virginia, So about a month into that deal, I figured out these guys weren't kidding about being in a serving kind of a company. So when the opportunity came along to see something different, it turned out to be Africa. And I thought, well, maybe lions and tigers might be a little bit preferable to dinosaurs from West Virginia. So I ended up in this place called Tanzania, which was a new country at the time, back in the 70s. If you're a gemstone person, you'll know Tanzania is where tanzanite, the pretty blue, clear stone, comes from. But it had nothing to do with that. I was actually digging ditches, latrines, basically, in that area. And that was the extent, really, of my Peace Corps adventures, because a guy came along, to make a long story short, and said, hey, I've got a better deal for you. If you're interested, I'll let you have a free ticket around Europe if you do a couple of things for me. So I thought, well, geez, is it better to be standing knee-deep in mud and some kind of animal excrement, or see Europe on somebody else's money, right? So I said, well, okay, I'll do that. So it turned out I had to do a few things that, when you're in your 20s, you don't think about, but when you're in your 40s, 50s, 60s, you start thinking, what in the hell was I doing? What was I thinking? And that really kind of started into my real adventures of seeing the world kind of thing. So I don't know how far you want me to go with this, because it's really a good story.
Well, what I want to know is, why you? Why did this person walk up to you? Because I imagine you weren't the only person at that particular Peace Corps site. Why did they pick you?
Well, it could be that maybe I did the most complaining about digging the ditches, the latrines, or that I just wasn't very good at it with a flat-nosed shovel. I'm not sure, but I've always had the sense that it wasn't just me that he asked, but I don't know of anyone else who ever took him up on the offer. So I couldn't really answer that.
Was it a Peace Corps person as well who walked up and asked you, or was it basically a recruiter from some agency?
Yes, recruiter. He needed some help on the ground. It was, back when, let's just take a guess here and say it was the NSA. They needed some people on the ground, which they actually had denied up until maybe 10 years ago or so, which allowed me to start talking about this and writing about it. But it was in a time when, no, we never had any boots on the ground and don't know what was going on. And we just did our intelligence through the clouds and through the telephone lines and through computers, et cetera. But it was NSA, and I was off books, so I wasn't really an NSA employee. I was just kind of paid as you go. They gave me kind of a number that I can go to any American Express office in Europe and say, give me some money, and they would give me money with that number. And by the way, if you're thinking trying to do that these days, they don't do that anymore. So don't even try it.
Oh, man.
And they'll deny it as well.
I was going to ask you for that number, so, well, yeah. Darn it.
Yeah, well, that sort of expired with my life with them. So.
Yeah, I bet.
But yeah, that was quite a time. I mean, I spent more time traveling and touring than I did sort of tracking terrorists, and that there is a whole nother story, if you want to get into that right now.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's talk about your travels. I know that you have, I think, lived and worked in at least all 50 states, but also, I think, over 50 countries. Yeah,
I have. I've been in every state in this country on business, at least. I've lived in probably 12 or 14 different states, including Alaska and Hawaii. I spent a summer and a winter over in Alaska with a 23-hour-a-day sunshine and 2.5 hours sunshine in the winter as well.
No thanks.
Yeah, that was quite interesting because the sun would come up about 10:45 a.m. and would be completely set like midnight by 2:30 in the afternoon, 2:15, 2:30 in the afternoon. And sort of that was their daylight savings, right?
That's ridiculous.
So I've lived there, and I've lived in Paris, I've lived in London, lived in Madrid, Rome, Sao Paulo, Brazil, Tokyo, Japan, Hong Kong, Malaysia.
So were these all different assignments, or were you tracking a particular person or group of people through multiple countries?
Well, anything outside of Europe the first time was mostly with my IBM career.
Gotcha.
The South America and the Asia was all about IBM. And I did spend a lot of time in Europe as well, but my first encounters with Europe was all about the terrorist activity.
So walk me through how that worked. Like, what did your job entail? I know that you got to, I'm assuming, hang out more than you had to actually work, right?
Yeah, and I had to check in every once in a while, et cetera. But what was happening at the time was terrorism was kind of coming of age in the early 70s. Before that, usually when you heard of a terrorist act, it was about somebody or something specific, and the fallout around it was minimalized. Let's say a politician was shot and killed, because he was whatever. It was against these guys' ideologies. I guess in the early 70s, they sort of figured out that didn't seem to have the impact that they were looking for. Because if you shoot a politician, they would just replace him with another one because, they're dime a dozen, those guys. So what they started doing was kind of spreading out and saying, well, let's go and start not minimizing the fallout and let's just say we want to kill some families and some children and some innocent bystanders and things like that with bombs and bullets and different things like that. And so that was kind of scary to a lot of people because that kind of hit home. That hit the heart and the moral sensitivity of our everyday citizen. It's like, oh my God, they're killing kids. We got to do something about that and innocent people. So what I was assigned to do was kind of try to follow certain people, track them, track their activities and or plans. If some person or thing wasn't identified, it would be about, well, we heard about some plans, so go check this out and see what they're doing. And we want you, being me, to understand it enough so that you could turn it over to the professionals to resolve the situation before it got to American shores. So that was the whole deal there. They did not want these terrorist activities to get to the United States of America, right? So, it was okay to learn about when it was in Europe, but we don't want it coming here, that sort of thing. So that's what I did there. And it was back in a time when there was no cell phones and there were no computers per se. There were, lots of computers, but none of them had really the stretch or the reach of the internet today does, So if there was no internet and things like that, a lot of library work, a lot of magazine work, microfiche, old style kind of things like that. And so that is really what was happening at the time, and I was kind of thrown in the middle of it, being young and impulsive and hard-headed and untrained and, that sort of thing. So the books aren't really about Jason Bourne and James Bond kind of characters where, they fight their way out of any situation or that sort of thing. It's more about trying to stay alive while I was doing this. But again, as I said, if you're in your 20s, you're going to live forever and you don't really think about consequences all that much.
You were what, like 22, 23 around this time, something like that?
Yeah, I was 23 and 73, and I stayed for like 3 years or so 25, 26 in that area there.
Okay, I have kids, and when they were 23, I don't think either one of them could, by themselves, figure out how to go get their vehicle inspected. So how is it that you, as a 23, 24-year-old kid, is just supposed to track down these people and infiltrate or overhear, or how does that work? Did you get any training at all?
Well, yes. I got about 3 weeks of training, hand-to-hand combat and things like that from a Marine instructor who taught Navy SEALs. And I also spent a week or 10 days, I guess, maybe in the Alps with an Italian survival group, special forces from Italy, in survival, learning how to survive, which is kind of, I thought, sort of an oxymoron, because after eating tarantulas and bark and things like that in the woods in the Alps, I don't think I ever saw that on a menu when I got to Europe. So I didn't really understand what that was all about, although I did see a few big spiders in some restaurants, but none were on the menu. So I'm not sure quite what that was about. The training was in hand-to-hand combat, but in a few instances, it kind of came in handy because I still have about a 1.5-inch scar on my palm from a knife fight, and I put my hand up a little bit too soon, and that didn't work out so well. But in those days, it was really a finite system that we were educated in. Like in high school, college, you sort of went to the library to do all your research, and that's really where I started, in the libraries and looking at microfiche and old newspapers and things like that. It's like, where did this come from? And it's kind of backtracking from there as to where it started, how it started, taking note of all the information. And that was my job, is to get as much information as I could about these people. And then the CIA or whoever this information was supposed to go to would say, not worth it, or, this looks interesting, and they'd come back to me sometimes and say, can I have more? And sometimes you never heard from them back again. So that is really, the crux of my 3 years of life there, one of my many past lives.
Sure.
Hey, Streetwalkers, here's a word from our sponsors.
If you'd like to help find answers for the families of unsolved crime victims from all over, or perhaps identify a Jane or John Doe, please visit DNAsolves.com, where you can submit your DNA from a consumer testing company like Ancestry or 23andMe to their database. DNAsolves.com.
Let's get back into it.
Now, going back to the specific style of terrorism that you were talking about, where we moved on from really just hitting a target and sort of made it a spectacle, hitting women and children as well, and parts of families and things. I feel like most people are under the impression that that particular style of terrorism was created and exclusively wielded by folks from, let's say, somewhere in the Middle East. Now, so far, I'm a little more than halfway through the first of your Hollow Man series books, which are based on your exploits, but I don't feel that there is any Middle East implications here. So these styles of terrorism on grandeur or whatever, who, where, when, who was it? I mean, I know you're not going to tell me who it was, but who was it?
Right. Well, here's the thing, is that a lot of the Middle East terrorism, it came along, but it came along a little bit later. Not to say that they weren't involved in Europe at the time, because they were, because I did check out a few leads and instances. Actually, the guy that you're reading about right now, Shaban, I changed his name, but there was some speculation that he was funded from Middle Eastern bank accounts. But that turned out to be not so true, because he was really after the money. When it comes down to terrorism, the thing I've learned about in life is that everything is about economics. No matter what you do, it's about economics. Usually personal enrichment is what I see from most people. It's like, how much am I going to get out of this? What am I going to get out of it? And really, this is what he was after. He was after the big payday. So I don't think we ever really established where he got the money to not only do the things he did, but to reward him for, on the larger scale, here's your hundreds of thousands or millions or whatever it happened to be at the time, not the billions or the hundreds of millions that we talk about today, lesser sums then, but the same kind of implications there. So I'm not sure that he wasn't funded, but in the second book, you'll see that it's all about Ireland and England and what they call the Troubles at the time, which was, the British are very sophisticated about what they call terrorism, and they just really called the IRA bombings and things like that the Troubles, right? And so life went on even though the Troubles were going on there, meaning that the bombings were getting haphazard and all that. But those particular guys were not at all funded by Middle Eastern kind of entities there. They had a different agenda, and it actually lasted a whole lot longer than most terrorist activities. It went right up into the 90s or so. But and then later on, way after I was out of it, you see all this Middle Eastern activity in, 2001, and those kinds of things were the most rememberable things. But there were others. So, it's really widespread. You have terrorist activities in the Philippines and Malaysia, and it's whatever it is, but most of it, what I was in on was what they call the origins, although if you look back at terrorism, you can quote unquote find terrorist activities all the way back into Attila the Hun's days,
Sure, yeah.
And I think the word terrorism kind of came into being maybe somewhere in the 1700s. But it had different implications, but there were still rules about it back then. Like wars, were fought. It's like, okay, we're going to come to this big battlefield and we're just going to go at it hand to hand, face to face. And then along comes the American Revolution, and these guys are suddenly hiding behind trees, and they're dressed in green. It's like British didn't know what to do with them, right? So that in itself is another kind of a terrorism, right?
Sure.
But we didn't call it that, right? Because, well, for one reason, the winners set the tone for history anyway. But
yeah, the history books are written by the winners.
Yeah. But anyway, I mean, that was just an example. And there are millions of other examples you could come up with, say, yes, but this or that. But what our government at the time was worried about was any terrorist activity in Europe that was going to visit our shores here. So that kind of got our attention here in the United States, because even right up till 2001, a lot of people, especially in the country, didn't even lock their doors at night.
Right.
Till then, until they understood how tenuous life really is.
The people not locking their doors was such an ingrained part of our society that even now, and it doesn't make any sense to anybody who's, a millennial or younger, but even now you'll see in a movie or a TV show, if somebody's on the run, they hop into a stranger's car, magically the keys are above the sun visor. I mean, that doesn't make any sense to anybody who doesn't realize that was an everyday occurrence.
Yeah, I mean, exactly.
My grandparents actually, from the moment I met them until they were in their 80s, they always left the keys to their car in their car. Always.
Right. My family did the same thing, and did never lock the doors until they start hearing about all these things. It's like, oh my gosh, it's going to come and visit me sooner or later. And that's really where everyone takes up. If it's not happening to me, it's not happening, right?
Yeah. It's not real until it touches me.
Right. And that was the real focus that came into being of terrorism in the 70s, is that all of a sudden it went from them over there, them over in this area, but, that's them, it's not me. But then when it starts to come here and affect you, it's like, or your children or somebody else's children, you sort of rationalize and visualize that it's your own children a little bit more than it's just a politician or something. So that started kind of people thinking, but it really didn't affect us here in the United States for many, 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 many years after that. Maybe 30 years after that. Yeah, anyway, tons of stories. I could talk for hours about it.
Yeah, no kidding, I bet. Paul, why did you get out of that particular agency?
Let's just say my usefulness sort of terminated toward the end, because in the third book, you'll see why I sort of go off reservation a little bit. It's really what the third book is based on, is that the MI6 agent who I had befriended, or had befriended me in basically my first week or two in country, and who absolutely saved my life probably a dozen times, literally a dozen times. Some of her fellow agents were sort of assassinated during that time period, and she was held under charges of murder, which she didn't do in Prague behind the Iron Curtains. So I sort of took it upon myself to break into the country, which was kind of unheard of at the time. You're usually trying to break out of a country, but to go in and help her, and she was none too pleased to see me there. And my handler was even less pleased to see me there. That probably, at the end of it, it kind of probably where they said, okay, we've had enough of you.
Well, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So now let's talk about writing. What made you decide to start writing these books? And again, I'm talking about the Hollow Man series. You started writing these books a few years ago. What made it okay for you to start telling some of these stories? Because these books are based on your exploits, right?
Right. The reason that I started writing in the first place was that my son is a gymnast, and he's currently in college as a NCAA gymnast. But when he was like 10 years old, all the parents would drop these kids off at the gym, and we would go to the local pub. And a couple of my friends, they would ask me, well, what did you do? And so I would tell them these stories. And one lady, who's a brilliant friend of mine, a doctor actually, she said, why don't you write it as a book? And I said, I don't know if I have time or energy or whatever. And she said, well, what else you got to do? So that one question there sent me on to write these books, to put all of my sort of escapades into novel form. And the more I wrote, the more I liked the experience. It's like, oh my gosh, this is really cool stuff. And so and it turns out that the books are probably, 80% of them are 90% true, something like that. And the more I started writing, the more I liked it, and, brought back memories and things like that. And so I put them all in the book. And as a side note, if you are halfway through the book, you will know that the knife fight that I was in, where I cut my hand. Yeah, I still have that scar.
Oh, really?
That's the scar I mentioned. Yeah, it was 1.5 inches long on my palm. But anyway, those kind of things were written down. And I sort of changed it enough to be kind of fiction, but realistic if that makes sense. So that, yeah, the bombing of the prime minister was a real event. His car was thrown over a 5-story church building into the courtyard in the next street. All true stuff there.
And you were there for that?
I was right around the corner. Yeah.
Holy shit.
Right around the closest corner you could get to it. All of that is kind of documented in not only history, but in books and newspapers and articles. And the downing of the aircraft later in the book is all true things. And the only thing that couldn't possibly be true are the scenes where I'm not in, so I don't really know what happened.
Right.
I don't know what happened there. I
Sure.
just kind of added them for suspense or for continuity or that sort of thing.
Yeah, to help fill in some gaps, maybe. That's that's writer's discretion, poetic license, if you will.
Right, and so that's why I call them fiction. I suspect that everybody I ever dealt with is probably dead by now, or wish they were. I don't give away any real secrets of NSA or CIA or anything like that, because I probably didn't know all that many at the time. I mean, it just was they follow this guy, yeah, sure, I'll do that. And I got very good at disguises. Put a pebble in your shoe, and it's amazing what a limp will do to your stature and your looks. That you add glasses to a face, and all of a sudden people don't see it anymore. They see glasses now.
I know. I mean, look at Clark Kent and Superman.
Well, yeah, that's sort of a hilarious kind of a thing, but that is it. You add a mustache, people don't recognize you anymore. So it was very easy. I mean, I used shoe polish a couple of times to turn my hair dark. I have blonde hair, and turn it black, and it's like totally different person, sort of thing. They just don't see it. And, I had some gray specks when you're 25 years old. What do you think that's going to do? I looked like I was 12 when I was 25. And so there you go. You add some gray specks, and they think you're an old man. You walk a little hunched over, and people just don't see what's going on around them. So it was very easy in those days to sort of change yourself. And it made it a little bit easier to follow people and things like that. So, yeah, all fun now, right? So,
the part where you said people don't really notice, what's around them or their surroundings, that reminds me, probably 15 years ago, I was working at a bank, and we were having sort of a mini conference about, the details, because I was doing mortgages and stuff like that. So it was a real detail-oriented job. And as soon as that little class started, there was a knock at the door, and this lady was like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I was here in the previous class. I left my sunglasses over there. Can I go get them?" And, we stopped, and, she did her thing and then left. And then about 10 minutes later, after the class was well underway, the person who was giving the class said, "Hey, this is a test. Does anybody remember what that lady was wearing?" And nobody, there was 40 of us in the classroom, and nobody remembered, because just like you said, nobody pays attention to their surroundings. That's what that reminded me of, that story you just told. But I want to go back to this lady who suggested that you start writing because, well, what else are you doing? Did you say that a bunch of parents would drop their kids off at the gymnasium or whatever, and then they'd go to a pub?
Yeah.
Was that in America?
Yeah.
Well, why did you call it a pub? How long have you been back, man? We don't call them pubs here.
See, that's a European that's staying over there too long. But I picked up a bunch of other words that they say, mostly UK-based. But anyway, when you go to the hospital, here we say you go to the hospital. There they say you're in hospital. I don't know why, but they leave out the.
Yeah, they do that if you go to university also. Yeah,
exactly. So it's like there's not it just doesn't exist in their natural colloquialism, I guess. But I've always called it a pub. It's always sounded to me like a better option than a bar, sort of thing. But
it does have a classier implication.
But most bars in the U.S. then are really connected to restaurants, right? I mean, there are some standalone bars still left, but what we consider bars are really associated with restaurants, and that's what this was as well. It was just like the connection, that people drink here and then they get their seats and then they sit down and have their dinner. But it was a pub it was a bar. It was either watch these kids for 4 hours doing tumbling and tripping over themselves and stuff like that when they're 10 years old, or go and have some refreshments there. And so after a few years of watching them, because, my son, he's done gymnastics since he's 3 years old. So, that gets old about when he turns 5, sort of thing. So we all, just kind of said, okay, let's just go have a drink for an hour or two. And that's where the stories started. I have no idea how they even first came up. I just would say some offhanded comment or something, and they'd say, oh, what the hell are you talking about? And then have to explain it, sort of thing. But that's where it really all started. I really went to college thinking that I was probably going to be the next Hemingway or, in today's terms, Michael Connelly or Lee Child or whoever. But I think it probably lasted about as long as college did, and then other parts of life took over, sort of thing. And I just never really got back to it until I retired, which is about that time, 2010 or 11, I think I retired. So, yeah, it was all about that, and that's how it got started.
Hey, Streetwalkers, here's a word from our sponsors.
You know those popping phone handle things that you see on everyone's phones nowadays? Well, how would you like to put your logo on them? Does your podcast or band need new merch? Do you want to bring attention to your new book or film? Maybe you need something unique for your Patreon or crowdfunding campaign. Then visit thelogopop.com, where you can customize them with the logo of your podcast, band, business, art, school mascot, or whatever else you can think of. These are way more affordable than you may think at thelogopop.com. Mention where you heard this ad and get free shipping on your entire order. Remember, that's thelogopop.com to order your custom popping phone handles. That's thelogopop.com.
Let's get back into it.
So you had no fear? I know that everybody's probably not around anymore, but, some of them might be, or some family members, or somebody might have a long memory. You're not scared of anybody coming back at you for any of your exploits?
No, I don't really name. All the names are changed, obviously.
Of course.
I still am a very close friend with the MI6 agent, who is also retired by now, but still lives in England. So there weren't really any other people that were sort of identifiable, as you would think. Mostly it was things happened in my head and a couple of bad guys and those kinds of people. As I said, I don't give away any sort of secrets that would affect any of our 3-letter security companies. So, no, I'm not really afraid. It's one thing I've never been afraid in my whole life. I don't know why, but things usually just don't scare me.
It's funny that you say that because at the beginning of this, you happen to mention, one of the reasons that you decided to go ahead with this opportunity was that you were young and invincible like everybody. But it sounds like you're invincible now still.
Well,
in your head.
Yeah, exactly. But to think that I could still engage in fist fighting a 20-year-old, you still think you can do that. But can I run as fast as I could before? No. I'd like to think I could, but I can't. Those kind of things. But as far as really fearful situations and all that, I don't know whether it's taught or learned or genetic, but I sort of enter any situation in at least an equal stance with everyone else, sort of thing. I don't really fear for my life. In fact, I actually do fear for, like, if you're with family members or something, then you have not just yourself to worry about, you have them to worry about. So it's really more fear for them and not for myself, because you'd stand between them and anyone who tried to hurt them, right? But when you're alone, you don't think about that. It's just like you and, okay, if you get mugged or something, here's my wallet, whatever you want, Or if I see the opportunity, I can certainly help myself in some situations, or at least think I can. I'm still pretty fit. I row on a rowing machine a half hour every day. I'm a pretty fit guy, but still not a Marine Corps specialist or anything like that, but no fear. Really, nothing really to fear until it presents itself, and then I don't know, what I do, but whenever it has in my life, I've been able to handle it.
You hear that, everybody? He can still kick your ass.
Yeah, that's right.
So the series is the Hollow Man series, and the first book is called The Hollow Man.
Correct.
This is going to sound like a dumb question, but does that have anything to do with the T.S. Eliot poem?
It does, yeah. Actually, the title comes from that poem, The Hollow Men, and there's a quote in the first pages of the book that is from T.S. Eliot's The Hollow Men. The part that I quote is about disguises and not seeing a real person behind something and not actually even being a real person, within. So you're hollow inside. You're just the skeleton of a being that sort of ventures into the world without thought or consequence. You just kind of venture into the world. That really is the kid in the first book, Doc. Gotcha.
The first book, The Hollow Man, is basically about, as you previously mentioned, your character, Doc, is chasing the bad guy, Shaban, throughout Europe. What is the second book about? What's the second book called, and what's it about?
The second book is called London Bridge is Falling Down, and it is about IRA bombings in the early 70s, what the newspapers in the UK dubbed the Troubles, quote unquote. I don't think they ever really called it terrorism in the UK, but that's exactly what it was. When you leave a car bomb outside of a hotel entrance or a pub in the UK or in Ireland, those were terrorist activities. Although, the IRA said it was, all about freedom and that sort of thing. In those days, there was a rumor of a list of people, places, things that the IRA was intending to bomb. So the character's goal was to find this list, find out if it existed, find out who and what was on it, so that future attacks could be kind of eliminated. But what was really going on is that was sort of the decoy for a larger thing, and I won't give that away, but it was for something larger going on in the country.
Is that in the book?
Yes, it is, yeah.
Okay.
So that's really what that one's about. The third book is called Surviving Prague, for obvious reasons. It takes place in Czechoslovakia in 75 at the time, at the height of the Cold War, and it was behind what they call the Iron Curtain. We weren't allowed and they weren't allowed unless you were some kind of envoy or something of that sort. So I have to get into, I don't have to, but I did get into the country and try to help save my MI6 agent partner, loosely called partner, to understand what was going on. And that actually turned out to be a much bigger problem to solve, but in the end we did. So the problem and what's going on is really the crux of the whole book, so I can't really get into more detail, except I'd like you to read it.
Of course, I plan on it. I'm just a slow reader.
That's okay. I appreciate you picking it up.
I don't have a whole lot of time, but I really have enjoyed, I guess I'm, 70% of the way, according to my Kindle, through the first book. It's a lot of fun. I recommend it, everybody. How are these books, how have they been received? I think that at least the first two were Amazon bestsellers. Is that right?
Correct. They were actually #1 bestsellers, both of them. The third book is halfway done, so it doesn't have any claim to fame yet. But the first two have been remarkably well received. The first book, on a whim, I entered it into a contest of 2,500 English-speaking books were in this contest, and it was called The World's Best Story. And I thought, well, I'll never hear from these guys again. And pretty soon they announced that I was in the top 10 finalists, and then I won the contest. So it has an award called the World's Best Story from 2014. And those guys actually still do a yearly contest as well. What
did you win? What was the prize?
The prize was an agent and a publisher, a real-life publisher sort of thing.
Holy shit, that's amazing.
Yeah, and they took the book and, I don't know how to put this nicely, but didn't help it. Let's just say that. I left it with them a year, and the only thing that I saw that they did was raise the price and reprint it in paperback form with lettering so small that it squeezed the book down to about 150 pages.
Oh, my goodness.
And they sold 0 books. They did 0 marketing. Unless your name is Balducci or Connolly or Lee Child or something like that, Patterson, nobody's going to do anything for you, not even when you get published by a legitimate firm. If you're not already a money-in-the-bank kind of a writer for them, then they're not going to really do the marketing for you. You have to do that yourself. And marketing is a full-time job. But yeah, both those books ended up to be #1 bestsellers on Amazon. And the third one I'm hoping will be received as well. But both of the first ones have won numerous awards, AIA awards and Subscribe Me awards, and just different kinds of things that happen when you're in the book world that people kind of notice, and they say, oh, let's review this book to our own standards and that sort of thing. And when it passes their quote-unquote standards, they sort of give you a little sticker or a prize or something like that. So
sure, yeah, that helps you sell more books because it's got more awards on the cover.
Right, and I don't actually put all those awards on the covers because I think it kind of looks so tacky personally.
Sure, yeah.
But I do have the 2014 one on there because that was sort of a bigger deal for me. So there's that. And as far as marketing goes, you could write the best book in the world, like a $1 million book, the most exciting kind of things. And if you can't get it to the agents and the publishers, the agent sells it to the publisher kind of prints it. If you don't get that part right, you don't get it to the people, right?
Yeah.
Now, the other option, of course, is to self-publish. But either way, whichever way you do it as a new writer, the marketing is on you. And by that, I mean that you have to build your own author platform, your own websites, your own media interactions. I mean, all that's on you at one time isn't enough. It's a constant endeavor, basically. You know what I mean? You're constantly selling yourself. And I know a lot of writers who say, oh, I don't like to sell myself. It makes me feel uncomfortable to say, look how great I am. But what I can tell you on that subject is that you're actually doing that every day of your life. You're selling yourself. I mean, look at every selfie on the internet. You're selling yourself. Look at me. That's what that says. I mean, that's what every selfie says. Look at me. I'm this person. I'm somebody. I'm whatever it is that they're trying to get at. But if you look at that, every time you go for a job interview and you say, look how good I am. I need this job, or I want this job. And every day at work, every day of your life, you're saying, like, hey, don't forget about what I did. It's like if somebody's talking about somebody else, it's like, well, yeah, but I did this. So you're doing that anyway. So what you just need to do is formalize it into marketing specifically for your books and to make you as an author appealable to your audience. And so that really is where that goes as far as marketing. It's just a full-time kind of a job, and you just have to bear with it and do it, sort of thing, if you want your books to sell.
Well, speaking of marketing and social media, where can people find you on the social medias, Paul?
You can find me on Facebook. My author page is the Hollow Man series, but my personal space is Paul Hollis. Easily find me there. I'm probably more active these days on Twitter. I have about a little over 80,000 followers there, and you can find me there at Hollow Man series. And I say I have 80,000 followers, but I also follow 75,000 or 76,000, something like that. Just a little advice for new media people. So what you don't want to do is you don't want to have 2 million followers and you're following 15, because then it tells you two things. One is that they're a celebrity and they know it. And the second is that it's all about me and not about you as my follower. What you have to do on social media is really interact with people and answer questions. You got to ask questions. You got to talk to them like they're normal human beings, because they are. And you talk to them, and that's how you build your readership, and that's how you get a connection with more people. That way it's not all about you, it's about them too. And believe me, they appreciate that sort of thing. Like, oh my gosh, you're a big name author. Well, I don't think I'm a big name author, but what I am is a person that will talk to you and give you answers if you ask questions, and will ask questions if I want to know something from them. I will retweet a lot of my followers' tweets, and certainly they appreciate that, and they get more people to follow you. And when your tweets go on their page, then their people see that, and it just goes on and on and on there. But it's all about the interaction and the networking with people. And you don't get to know every one of the 75,000 personally, because there are some people who just never interact. But you get to know people, and they get to see that you are a human person, and you have some sort of sense of humor, and you have some integrity, you have some knowledge about some things, and you find out the exact same thing about them. Then they say, okay, if I'm going to buy a book, I'll buy this guy's book rather than somebody else's who says, oh, look at me, I'm a big name and authored them, and this is my latest book, so just buy it.
Well, that makes sense. Paul, I feel like I could talk to you for several hours, but we don't have that time today, so maybe we'll have you come back on at some point in the future. But as we're heading out, is there anything that I didn't ask you or we didn't talk about that you wanted to talk about today?
Well, my writing is kind of visual, so what I try to do is put people in situations where they get to see real dialogue and get to see real location, which locations sort of like make the mood of the book, and they also set rules for the characters, really, to make decisions within. But what I really want people to do is get out and see the world. Understand that there's a real world out there to see. If you think somebody is, let's say, a terrorist because of their religion or because of their culture or something else, go and talk to them. They're normal people just like you and I and whatever. I used to live in St. Louis for a while, and right on the Mississippi River, not 20 miles west of the Mississippi River, and I know people who have not even ever crossed that river, who lived in St. Louis their whole life and not even crossed that river to Illinois. And it's like you need to get out and see and understand, and you'll see that people, Muslim, Jewish, whatever, blacks, white, it doesn't really matter. You'll get to understand and know that there are such wonderful people out there that are just people, and it's like it transcends politics and it transcends religion and culture and all that sort of thing. They want the same things that you want. Just get out and see the world and interact with the world, not just go on a vacation and stay in a gated resort or something of that sort. You know, if you go to Puerto Rico, see the Puerto Ricans, go where they would go and talk to them, see what's going on. I mean, you'll learn so much, and it'll open up your mind to a whole world out there. And it really is one kind of unified world, and the Internet's helped that a lot. But you need to get out and see the world, experience the world if you can.
Well, there is no greater inspiration to go out on than that right there. Ladies and gentlemen, Streetwalkers, this is Paul Hollis, and he is the author of the Hollow Man series, which I am thoroughly enjoying, and I think you will too, so go grab that from Amazon. And until the next time we talk, Paul, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day and your hectic schedule to hang out and let us get to know you a little bit better on Fascination Street, man. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for asking me. I appreciate being here. It's been a great experience, and I hope it didn't bore you guys too much.
Silly. And look for me to reach out later in the year, and we can do it again.
Absolutely, anytime.
Thanks, Paul. Have a great day.
Thanks, you too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hey, Streetwalkers, it's time for a giveaway. Thanks to our generous friends at Sylvania, we're going to give away some Bluetooth speakers. What do you think? These are fairly special and limited Fascination Street podcast edition, as they have a little Fascination Street emblem on the end. This oblong Bluetooth speaker is about 8 inches tall and about 3 inches in diameter, and is IPX4 waterproof. So how do you win? Well, what I need all of you to do is post a short video to your Instagram story, your Facebook story, or even your TikTok, telling everybody why you love Fascination Street Podcast and which is your favorite episode. Make sure to tag the show in these videos, and each week I'll pick one winner to win one of these special limited edition Sylvania Bluetooth speakers, and I'll mail it to you. And I might even throw a couple of other Fascination Street Pod swag in there as well. So tell a friend, tell all your friends, and include it in your stories on Instagram, Facebook, or TikTok. And don't forget to tag the show, Fascination Street Podcast. Opening music is the song Magnolia from the 2014 album Intransigence, used with permission from Douglas Miles Clark. Closing music is Apollo from the 2001 album Into the Known by the band Sapphire. Thanks for hanging out with us and getting to know a little bit about our guest. We'll see you next time on Fascination Street.